The street was quiet, filled with dust and fading lights. Machines hummed softly in the background and tired voices echoed in the distance. But one figure stood out in that dull evening. A small alien girl with dull green skin and silver eyes. Limping slowly with a broken mechanical arm dragging beside her, her name was Zira. Once her name meant something. On her home planet of Virax, Zira had been called the Harp of Stars, a child who could play the Shalik harp like no other. Her music had brought peace to angry leaders, joy to children, and even made the stars feel closer. But that was a long time ago, before the war, before her fall, before she was replaced by silence. Now she wore an old cloak covered in oil stains, her feet were bare, her fingers trembling, and her mechanical left arm sparked with small electric pulses. The joints were rusted and some parts were missing. She looked like a ghost of her former self. She passed through a human settlement on a quiet planet called Dern 5, where humans and aliens lived side by side, though not always in harmony. People stared at her as she walked by, some with pity, others with curiosity, but no one spoke. No one dared to ask who she was or what had happened to her. Zira sat down beside a trash bin, her body weak from walking all day. Her stomach growled, but she ignored it. She wasn't here for food. She was running from her past, from the voices in her head that told her she was useless now. A small human boy passed by holding a toy made of wires and scrap. He looked at her with wide eyes and asked, "Are you okay, miss?" Zira looked up, her voice barely a whisper. "I used to play music," she said. "Now I can't even lift my hand." The boy frowned. "Why not?" She lifted her broken mechanical arm slowly. "It's dead," she said, "like the music inside me." Then she looked away as if ashamed. Her eyes were heavy, filled with sorrow and shame. From behind a nearby wall, someone had been listening. A man, human, with grease on his hands and a tool belt around his waist. He wore a cap that said, "Fixer's Pride," and goggles pushed up on his forehead. His name was Darren, and he fixed broken things, not people, not dreams, just machines. But something about the way she spoke, the way she whispered "dead," stirred something in him. He had once heard that word from his little sister after their father died. It wasn't just sadness, it was giving up. He stepped forward, clearing his throat. Zira flinched. Her people had taught her to fear humans, especially the ones who fix things. They were known to be rough, cold, and never kind, but this man just looked at her arm, not her face. "That's old tech," he muttered. "Mixed design, Virax plating with solar core wiring. No wonder it's fried." Zira blinked, surprised by how calm he sounded. "You're not scared of me?" she asked. He shrugged. "You're not the first alien I've seen with a busted limb." Zira tried to stand but stumbled. Her knees hit the ground, and she winced. Darren walked over and gently caught her before she could fall again. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said quietly. "I have a workshop nearby." She shook her head. "You don't understand. My people already tried. They said it couldn't be fixed. They said I'm just a broken tool." He looked at her, not with pity, but with curiosity. "Maybe they gave up too fast," he said. "Come on, let me look at it, no charge." Zira hesitated. She didn't want hope. Hope hurt more than rusted metal. But her body was too weak to keep arguing, and her heart, though wounded, wanted to believe, just for a second, that someone might see her as more than trash. She gave a slow nod. Darren gently lifted her up, her tiny frame light in his arms, and carried her toward his workshop. The doors were old and metal, but the inside was warm with light, filled with shelves of tools, machines, and gadgets in different stages of repair. He placed her gently on a padded bench and sat down in front of her. "I'm Darren," he said simply. "What's your name?" "Zira," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "Nice to meet you, Zira." As he began examining her arm, she looked around. Her eyes fell on a dusty keyboard in the corner, the kind humans used to play music. Something inside her stirred. A memory, a note, a heartbeat, and then, without thinking, she hummed a tune, soft and broken, barely a sound. But Darren froze. His hands stopped moving. His eyes widened. "You sang that?" he asked. Zira looked away. "I used to," she said, before the silence. Darren said nothing for a moment. Then he looked down at her broken arm again. "Well," he said at last, "let's see if I can fix the silence too." The door creaked as Darren pushed it open with his foot, still holding Zira carefully in his arms. The shop was warm, filled with yellow lights and the soft ticking of machines. The air smelled like oil, metal, and something burnt, but comforting, like a place where broken things waited to be whole again. Zira looked around, her eyes wide with quiet wonder. Shelves lined the walls, holding parts of old robots, damaged, hover bikes, shattered data pads, and strange devices she couldn't name. Tools hung neatly above a long workbench, and in one corner sat a dusty keyboard covered in wires and bolts. Darren gently placed her on a padded chair with a metal armrest. He knelt beside her, checking her broken limb again. He didn't ask questions. Not about the war, not about her past, not even about the song she had hummed. He just got to work. Zira stayed silent, watching him. His hands were rough but careful. He moved like someone who had done this for years, not just fixing machines, but respecting them. Her people, the Virax, never treated mechanics with honor. They were called grease shadows, useful but low, not worthy of art or music, but this human was different. He cleaned her mechanical arm with a soft cloth first, wiping away grime and dried oil. The spark stopped, but the limb still didn't move. Some of the plating had cracked, and deep inside the arm, one of the energy nodes was blackened and dead. "This tech," Darren muttered to himself, "is half music interface, half movement system." Zira blinked, surprised. You know musical tech?" He nodded, still working. "I once fixed an old Terran sound harp for a traveling singer. That thing had living wires that reacted to voice pitch. Took me 3 days to understand it, but I figured it out." She looked down at her hand, which rested uselessly in her lap. "My people tried," she said quietly. "They called me faulty, unworthy of repair." Darren didn't stop working. "Then your people don't know what they lost." Zira's throat tightened. Those words, so simple, hit harder than she expected. She had heard so many cruel voices tell her she was done. She never thought a stranger would say something kind. "Why are you helping me?" she asked softly. Darren shrugged. "Because you asked for nothing," he replied. "And because I heard you hum." He turned to his wall of parts, pulling out a few thin silver wires, a glowing micro-core, and something that looked like an old speaker chip. He placed them beside her arm like puzzle pieces. Zira tilted her head. "That won't work. Those are Earth pieces. My tech is Virax design." Darren smiled a little. "Machines don't care about borders. They just want to work. It's people who make things complicated." He began connecting the wires carefully, unscrewing a small hatch on her arm and inserting the glowing core. A soft pulse of light moved through the limb. Zira gasped as she felt the warmth travel up her shoulder. I felt that," she whispered. Darren nodded. "Good. Means we're getting somewhere." Hours passed and the shop grew quiet except for the hum of low machines and Darren's soft muttering as he worked. Outside, the night deepened, and the stars peeked through the clouds above the small human settlement. Zira's eyes began to close, her body tired, but her heart less heavy than before. She hadn't felt safe in years, not even with her own kind. But here, in this messy human shop, something felt right. She whispered, "I used to play the harp of suns at the gathering of moons. They used to cheer for me. Now they look away." Darren didn't reply for a moment. Then he said, "Let them look away. You've got better things to do." He stood and brought the dusty keyboard from the corner, placing it near her. "This isn't a Shalik harp, but it's something." Zira looked at the keys. Her fingers twitched slightly. The repaired wires inside her arm were responding. Not fully, but more than before. Darren handed her a small wire-tipped glove. "Try touching one key," he said gently. Her hand shook as she raised it. Her breath caught in her throat. But slowly, she brought one trembling finger to a key, and pressed. A single note rang out, soft, clean, and pure. Zira froze. then pressed another and another. She wasn't playing yet, but something inside her was waking up. Darren didn't say anything. He just watched with a calm face as she stared at the keyboard, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. After a few minutes, she stopped and whispered, "It still hurts." He nodded. "Good means you're alive." Zira gave a small smile, the first in years. Outside, a breeze swept through the alleyway, carrying the sound of notes into the night, and deep inside the workshop, a silent promise was made. He would rebuild her, not just the arm, but the hope that once danced with her music. Darren's workshop was quiet the next morning. The machines were still sleeping, but Zira was already awake, sitting on the same padded chair where she had played her first note the night before. She looked at her mechanical arm, still partly broken, but no longer dead. A soft blue light glowed inside the joints now, and her fingers responded to her thoughts. Slow, shaky, but real. Darren came in with 2 mugs, steam rising from them. One he placed beside her, the other he sipped slowly. "Tea," he said. "Not the good kind, but it wakes you up." Zira took the mug gently, holding it with both hands. She noticed how her left hand didn't spill it this time. The fingers stayed steady, gripping carefully. Her heart thudded in her chest. "Thank you," she whispered. Darren sat on a metal stool beside her, resting his elbows on his knees. "I couldn't sleep," he said. "Kept thinking about your tech. It's like music and machinery were made to live together in that arm. Your people built something beautiful, but didn't finish it." Zira lowered her eyes. "They finished it when I was still famous, but when the war came and I was injured, they replaced the part fast without care, just so I could serve again, not play." He nodded slowly. "So they turned the arm into a tool, not an instrument." She gave a quiet nod. "I stopped being Zira the musician and became Zira the broken." Darren looked over at the keyboard, still sitting nearby. A few of its keys had dust on them again, as if the music had gone back to sleep. "You played last night," he said. "You woke something up, not just in that machine, but in this place." Zira gave a weak smile. "I don't know if I can do it again." "You don't have to," Darren replied. "Not until you're ready." He stood up and walked toward his wall of parts, pulling out a small box made of glass and metal. He opened it and took out several thin energy wires, 3 glowing chips, and 1 ancient speaker cone that still carried the faded logo of a human. "Music brand, Tone Core. What's that for?" Zira asked. He grinned. "We're upgrading your arm today, not just to fix it, but to make it yours again, not a weapon, not a tool, an instrument." Zira blinked in surprise. "You can do that?" "I can try," he said, "but I need your help. You're the musician here, not me. I fix what's broken. You tell me what it's meant to sound like." She stared at him, her throat tightening again. Her own people had thrown her aside, but this human, this stranger, was rebuilding her not just with tools but with trust. "I remember the way it used to vibrate when I played," she whispered. "Soft, like breathing, the way the notes echoed through my fingertips. The feedback made it feel alive, like the harp was playing me back, not just the other way around." Darren nodded, listening carefully. "We'll replicate that." He began removing the cheap parts her people had shoved inside her arm during the war. Power cells meant for soldiers, not artists. Metal that responded only to force, not finesse. In their place, he installed the Tone Core chip, wrapped the energy wires along her neural pathways, and placed a sound buffer near her wrist joint to catch vibrations and send them back gently. It took hours, but Zira didn't complain. She watched every move, learning the way he worked, every screw he turned, every wire he soldered. She saw the care in his hands that once only fixed engines and scrap, now shaping something delicate. At one point, a small spark jumped from the wire to her arm. She flinched, but Darren was quick, catching the energy and redirecting it. "Sorry," he said. "Didn't mean to zap you." Zira smiled. "That's the first time it hurt." "In a good way," he laughed. "That means we're close." When it was done, he gently closed the panel on her forearm, sealing it with a soft click. Then he reached for the keyboard again and placed it in front of her. "Ready?" he asked Zira. took a breath, lifted her hand and pressed a key. This time the note was richer, warmer. It echoed through her bones, and she gasped. The new arm didn't just respond. It sang. She moved her fingers across more keys. Faster now. The notes came alive, dancing in the air. Her other hand followed, and soon she was playing a simple tune, one she hadn't dared to try in years. Tears ran down her cheeks, but her fingers didn't stop. Darren stood quietly, watching, not speaking, not smiling, just listening, fully present. When she finished, silence filled the room, not heavy but sacred. Zira looked up, voice shaking. "You gave it back to me." He shook his head. "You already had it. I just reminded your arm how to listen again." She laughed softly through her tears. But just outside the window in the shadowed street, a figure watched them. An alien male with sharp armor and a bitter stare. His eyes narrowed at the sound of Zira's music. He turned and walked away, speaking into a small communicator. The outcast plays again, with a human's help. Far away, someone replied coldly. "Then it's time we silence her for good." Rain began to fall outside Darren's workshop, soft at first, then heavier. The roof rattled with each drop, but inside the sound was warm. Zira sat quietly near the keyboard, both her hands resting on her knees, one made of flesh, the other now glowing faintly with new life. Darren stood nearby, wiping oil off his hands with a cloth. He didn't rush her. He didn't speak. He waited. Zira looked at the keys. Her heart beat faster. This was the moment. The test. Could she really play again? Her mechanical fingers twitched. Nervously, the upgrades Darren installed responded like a dream. But still, her mind was filled with fear, memories, and doubt. The last time she tried to perform in front of others, her arm had failed. The note cracked, the audience whispered, and her clan turned away from her like she was a shame they wanted to erase. She closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "You are not broken anymore." Then slowly, she lifted both hands and placed her fingers on the keys. The first note came, gentle, perfect. It hung in the air like a drop of silver light. Darren's breath caught, Zira's eyes opened, and her lips parted in surprise. She pressed a second note, then a third. Then she moved her fingers faster, feeling the sound flow through her. The rebuilt arm didn't just follow, it danced with her. It vibrated gently, feeding the music back into her nerves just like she remembered from her childhood. She began playing an old Virax lullaby, soft and sweet. Her fingers moved smoothly across the keys, like they had never stopped. The room, filled with sound, real, rich, alive. Darren stepped back, giving her space. He watched in silence as Zira let go of her fear. The music came from somewhere deep inside her, where no war or pain could reach. Outside, the sound of the rain blended with her melody, and something magical happened. People started to gather. A young human boy who once asked her if she was okay stopped in the street, hearing the music through the thin walls. He called out to others, pointing to the window. An older alien woman peeked from behind her stall, carrying vegetables in her arms. Her eyes widened when she heard the tune, a tune she had not heard in years, one that belonged to Virax temples and sacred halls, not a dirty human street. Soon a small group gathered outside Darren's shop, standing quietly in the rain, listening. Inside, Zira felt something stir inside her chest, a feeling she had buried long ago. Pride, joy, and, most of all, belonging. But as her hands moved faster, her breath caught. She saw movement in the window. 3 aliens stood just outside the light, faces half covered by hoods, their eyes glowing softly in the dark, watching, judging. Zira slowed her song. The notes became softer, uncertain. Darren noticed the change. He stepped closer and leaned in. "Don't stop," he said gently. "This is your voice, not theirs. Let them hear it, even if they don't want to." Zira looked at him, his eyes steady, not afraid. Slowly, she turned, her eyes back to the keys, and began again. But this time she played something different. It wasn't a lullaby or a temple hymn. It was her own melody. Something new, something she created in this very room. The notes were slower, deeper, full of pain and healing mixed together. Her fingers moved with confidence now, her arm glowing steadily, strong and alive. The crowd outside grew. Humans and aliens stood side by side, listening under umbrellas and plastic covers. No one speaking, just listening. Even the three hooded aliens didn't move. They stood like statues, but something in their eyes had changed. They weren't just watching, they were. Remembering when the last note faded, silence followed, but it wasn't empty. It was full of emotion, full of something sacred. Then one human began to clap, then another. Then an alien woman joined them, and soon everyone was applauding. Not loud but sincere. Zira sat frozen, her hands still above the keys. Her chest rose and fell with shaky breaths, her eyes filled with tears she couldn't hold back anymore. Darren came beside her and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You did it," he said. "You really did it." She looked up at him, tears running down her cheeks. "I thought I lost it forever." He shook his head. "You just needed someone to believe you still had it." Outside, the hooded figures turned away and disappeared into the shadows, but one of them dropped something at the doorstep, an old Virax pin, once worn only by honored musicians. It was rusted, bent, but real. Darren picked it up and placed it on the table beside her. "Seems like someone remembers who you are." Zira touched the pin gently. Her fingers trembled, not from weakness, but from emotion. For the first time in years, she wasn't invisible. She wasn't broken, she was Zira again, and her music was just getting started. The next day, the workshop doors stayed open longer than usual. Darren moved a few chairs outside, cleared space around the keyboard, and added a small speaker system he had pulled from an old junk bot. It wasn't fancy, but it carried sound. Zira stood by the doorway, her repaired arm glowing faintly. The air around her buzzed, not from the tech, but from the nerves in her chest. Last night she had played again, really played, and the whole street had listened. Now, word had spread. They came slowly at first. A few humans with curious faces, some alien elders with wrinkled skin and sharp eyes, children skipping with sticky hands and dirty clothes, whispering, "The broken harp girl can play again." Zira sat down on the stool quietly. Darren adjusted the microphone near the keyboard, then gave her a thumbs up. "Just be you," he said. "Don't try to impress anyone, just play what's inside, that's enough." She nodded. Her hands shook slightly, but when her fingers touched the keys, calmness returned like a familiar old friend. She played the same melody she created last night. Slow, emotional, filled with pain and healing. This time, she added new notes, lifting parts of the tune higher, letting them soar like birds taking flight after years in a cage. The crowd listened without speaking. Some smiled softly, others wiped tears from their eyes. Darren watched from the side, proud and silent, but not everyone in the crowd was smiling. Toward the back, 3 Virax officials stood in long cloaks, their eyes cold, their expressions unreadable. They whispered to each other, shaking their heads. "This is a disgrace," one muttered. "She performs in a human shop like a common street act." "The council will not be pleased," said another. "Her songs were meant for temples, not dirt and scrap. She breaks tradition." The third narrowed his eyes. "She brings shame to the name of the Harp of Stars. We must remind her of her place." As the music continued, one of them stepped forward, pushing through the crowd. He waited until Zira finished her piece, letting the last note fade into silence. Then he raised his voice. "This performance must stop," he said sharply. "Zira of Virax, you are not permitted to perform in public. You were exiled from the Hall of Music after your failure, have you forgotten?" Gasps rippled through the crowd. Zira's fingers froze above the keys. Her breath caught, her heart sank. Darren stepped forward immediately, standing between the official and Zira. His voice was calm but firm. She's not in your hall anymore. She's not under your rules. Here, she's free to play, she's free to be herself, the Virax official sneered. You, a human mechanic, dare to speak to a cultural guardian of Virax? I fix what others throw away, Darren said. And you threw her away. So maybe it's your culture that needs repairing, the crowd murmured in support. Humans and aliens alike stood closer to Zira, protecting her with their presence. The official's face twitched, but he didn't move. This is not over, he said coldly. You will hear from the council. He turned and stormed off with the others, disappearing into the street shadows. Zira's hands trembled again. Her voice was barely a whisper. I shouldn't have played. I brought trouble to you, Darren. But Darren turned to her, his eyes steady. No. You brought truth. You brought beauty. You reminded people what music feels like. That's never wrong. One of the older alien women stepped forward from the crowd. Her face was kind, her eyes bright. She held out a small bundle wrapped in soft cloth. I kept this for years, she said. It belonged to my daughter. She died in the war. But she loved your music. She called you her hero. Please take this. Zira opened the cloth carefully. Inside was a small, hand-carved flute made from crystal wood. It shimmered with soft blue light. Tears filled Zira's eyes. Her fingers closed gently around the flute. Thank you, she whispered. I'll keep her song alive. That evening she played again, this time with both the keyboard and the crystal flute. Her hands moved with growing confidence. Her voice, though silent, in words spoke through every note. The people didn't just listen, they felt. Even those who didn't understand the Virax language could understand her pain, her joy, her rebirth. And when the music stopped, no one clapped at first. The crowd was silent, not because they disapproved, but because they were moved, because they had nothing left to say that could match what they heard. Then slowly, one by one, they bowed their heads in respect. In that moment, Zira wasn't broken. She wasn't exiled. She wasn't forgotten. She was an artist, and her audience had returned. Night fell again over the quiet settlement on Dern 5, but the streets were alive with whispers. Children played soft tunes on makeshift instruments. Alien elders hummed melodies, not sung for decades, and in every corner of the market, people spoke of the girl who brought music back from silence. Zira sat in Darren's workshop, her fingers resting on the keyboard, her flute lying beside her. She had played many times now, but tonight felt different. The crowd outside was larger than ever. Not only locals, but travelers too. Humans, aliens, even a few merchants from distant systems. Some came for curiosity, some for hope, some for answers. Darren paced quietly in the background, checking the speaker wires, fixing small details. But his eyes always returned to her, watching her with the same calm pride he had since the first note she played. You sure you're ready? He asked softly. Zira looked at him, then at the open door where hundreds now gathered in silence. She gave a small nod. I don't think I was ever truly ready, she said. But that doesn't matter anymore. She stepped outside with Darren. By her side, a simple wooden platform had been set up using crates and metal sheets. It wasn't a stage, but it was enough to share her sound. The crowd made room as she climbed up. Her heart pounded, but her hands felt strong. The mechanical arm, her burden for years, now felt like part of her again. Not a shameful reminder, but a living extension of her soul. Zira lifted her flute first, holding it close. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and began. The first note was soft, floating in the air like mist. Then the second note joined it, full and warm. Then the third, and the fourth. Soon, the music wasn't just heard, it was felt, vibrating in every chest, echoing in every memory. Her fingers moved like they were telling a story, her story, a tale of childhood joy, of fire and screams, of broken dreams, and finally, of healing. People stood still, eyes wide, faces wet with emotion. Even the roughest men in the crowd lowered their heads, and children stopped fidgeting. listening like the stars themselves had begun to sing. As she moved from the flute to the keyboard, the notes grew stronger. Her left hand, the mechanical one, led the dance, light and fierce. Her right hand followed with soft harmony. Each chord told a truth. She had not been destroyed, only paused, like a song waiting for the next. First, far beyond the crowd, a hologram began to flicker above a merchant ship. It streamed the performance live, without permission, but without harm. Others picked it up, spaceports, trade stations, even ships in orbit, tuning in as the girl with the metal arm played the song of a galaxy that forgot how to listen, and on the distant planet Virax. The signal reached the Hall of Music. The Great Council sat frozen, the music filling the chamber. "That's her," one elder whispered. "Impossible," said another. Her file said she was done, her limb failed, her spirit broke. But no, one could deny what they heard. It wasn't noise, it wasn't weakness, it was the sound of someone who had been buried alive and rose from the ashes. Back on Dern 5, Zira finished her piece with one long note, held high and trembling. It carried through the wind past the buildings, across the clouds, and into every heart below. When the final note faded, no one clapped right away. Instead, there was only silence, deep and powerful, as if the galaxy itself had paused to breathe. Then slowly a sound began, not applause, not cheers, but singing. A human child sang the lullaby she played days ago. Then a Virax elder joined with the old temple chant. Then others began humming, mixing languages, tones, memories, creating something new. Zira stepped back, tears on her cheeks. She had started a song, but the galaxy had finished it. Darren stood behind her, watching the miracle unfold. "You hear that?" he whispered. "That's your song now, forever." Suddenly, a shuttle landed just outside the crowd. Sleek, black, and marked with the crest of the Virax High Council. Guards stepped out, followed by a tall Virax woman in ceremonial robes. Her face was unreadable, her eyes sharp. Zira tensed. Darren stepped in front of her, ready to speak, but the woman raised her hand. "I am not here to silence you," she said. "I am here to listen." The crowd parted as she stepped forward, standing directly in front of Zira. "For years," she continued, "we lost sight of what music truly meant. We feared change. We feared flaw. But today, you reminded us, music is not perfect, music is real." She removed the brooch from her chest, a symbol worn only by the highest music keepers, and held it out. Zira gasped. That's the emblem of the first voice." "You deserve it," the woman said. "More than any of us." Zira took it with trembling hands, the crowd watching in stunned silence. The wind blew gently, and somewhere in the stars, a new voice had been added to the song of the universe. Her voice. Weeks had passed since the night the galaxy heard Zira's song, but the memory of that night still lived in every corner of Dern 5 and beyond. Her music wasn't just a performance anymore. It had become a message, a spark that lit hearts and crossed walls that once divided worlds. Zira now walked with confidence through the market, not hiding behind cloaks or lowered eyes, but standing tall. Her repaired arm no longer sparked with broken pain. It glowed with pride, with purpose. Children ran up to her, asking questions, holding small instruments they built from junk, eager to show her what they'd learned. She smiled, kneeling to listen to each of them. She remembered when her voice was locked inside her. Now she gave that voice to others. Darren watched from his workshop doorway, leaning against the frame. His hands still smelled like machine oil, but his eyes were soft with something more than satisfaction. It was quiet joy, the kind you feel when something you fix becomes something beautiful. One afternoon, Zira returned to the workshop, carrying a case made of polished wood. She set it on the bench and opened it carefully. Inside was a new instrument, half keyboard, half stringed harp, part human design, part Virax crystal. "Tech, I want to build this with you," she said. Darren blinked, then grinned. "You mean, together?" She nodded. "Together, you helped me remember who I am. Now I want to build something that brings both our worlds into one sound." For days, they worked side by side. The new instrument was delicate and strange, a keyboard shaped like a wave. With crystal strings stretched above it, it responded to both touch and emotion. Zira tuned the crystal parts while Darren adjusted the circuit cores and stabilizers. Neither spoke much, but the silence between them was comfortable, filled with shared focus and growing respect. When it was finished, the two stood back and looked at their creation. It shimmered in the light, humming softly as if it already held a song inside. Zira placed her hands on it and played the first chord. The sound was like wind through glass, clear, gentle, and full of feeling. Darren closed his eyes and listened. The music wasn't from Earth and it wasn't from Virax. It was from somewhere new, somewhere that only existed because two broken lives had come together. Later that evening, Zira held a small concert, not for crowds, not for diplomats, but for the children of the town. She sat on the same platform, outside Darren's shop, the new instrument in her lap. The little ones sat cross-legged in the dust, their eyes wide, their mouths open in wonder. She played songs that told stories, of stars being born, of travelers finding home, of broken things learning to shine again. The children clapped, laughed, and even sang along, even when they didn't know the words. One small alien girl came up afterward, holding a toy harp made from scrap metal and wire. She looked up shyly. "Miss Zira, can you teach me?" Zira knelt and took the toy gently. "Of course," she said. "Music is for everyone, even if your hands shake, even if your voice cracks, even if the world once told you to stay silent, you still have a song inside you." That night, Zira looked up at the stars, her emblem of the first voice shining softly on her chest. She remembered the girl she used to be, the one who fell during the war, the one who was told she was finished. She also remembered the man who found her humming behind a trash bin. Darren stepped beside her, holding 2 cups of tea. He offered one, and they sat on the stairs outside the shop. "I fixed a lot of things in my life," he said. "But I never knew I'd help fix something like this." Zira smiled. "You didn't fix me, Darren. You gave me tools, you gave me time, but I rebuilt myself. With your hands beside mine." He nodded, sipping quietly. "Still, I'm proud of you." "Then be proud of us," she said. From the window behind them, music floated out. One of the children practicing on the crystal, harp, slightly off-key but full of heart. Zira chuckled. "That was me once." "And now," Darren said, "you're someone they'll all remember, someone who turned silence into a second chance." She looked out at the village, the lights, the faces, the laughter. "I thought I lost everything," she whispered, "but it turns out I was just waiting for someone who believed I could still play, someone who used his hands to give me hope." Darren didn't say anything, but Zira knew, sometimes you don't need words to say thank you. Sometimes music is enough, and on that world under that quiet sky, the song of a once broken girl continued, not just in sound but in every heart she touched. Hope, rebuilt by human hands.